Sarah mentioned, you can find these resources on the WRCCS website. My own suggestion is that if it's easy to look at the screen, that's great. But you know, myself, I have the document that we're going to be sharing right in front of me as well. So the PDF, which is called Authorizer Best Practices, might be helpful to you to just have it. So we'll get started here. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. Thank you. So as I kind of mentioned in my first introduction, we've had this really great partnership between the DPI and the WRCCS in the creation of these documents and in thinking about what authorizers and potential authorizers for the future might need to be helpful to them in being a successful authorizer with their charters. And just like you guys have very different authorizer needs, you know, there are multiple other iterations of what authorizers are, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But through the federal grant that the DPI received, the WRCCS was created within that grant. And then underneath that, Sarah and WRCCS has subcontracted with people like us at the ISN to help create the materials and trainings like the one you're doing today. So the document that we're talking about, the Wisconsin Charter School Authorizer Best Practices, is one example of a document that has been created with a very large number of people providing input, including listening sessions and feedback and other iterations. And you can imagine when you're working with the department, you've got lots of iterations of things before it becomes final. So, and because this is being recorded, I won't say more about that.
Except for that it is still kind of iterative, like that it's final in that we're going to start using it, but it's not necessarily like final forever.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if you plan on using the PDF that's in there, the best practices document we'll be going over today, you really should just go back to the website and when you want to use it, download it at that point or find the link and send people to that link, because we will definitely make changes to it again in the future, although it's in pretty good shape right now. So, okay, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so today's purpose is really just what you see listed there on the 2 bullets, to review what is called the Authorizer Best Practices. It was formerly named the Wisconsin Charter School Authorizer Principles and Standards. And it's a little confusing to call it that. So it's really, you know, it's been changed to be named Authorizer Best Practices. And it's clearly that's what it is what authorizers need to do to be successful in their role. And so we want to review it and make sure you understand it. And there'll be certain sections of it that'll probably be more meaningful to you than others. And by no means is this meant to be a fully, you're not supposed to walk out of here and be able to do a training on the best practices. It's more to, you know, introduce you to it and answer the questions that you have, whether they're directly related to this document or just questions that the document makes you think about, or other things you're thinking about around this information. Okay, so we're gonna just kind of dive in, and I don't know, Sarah, if the best thing is to stay here and then go back and forth to document, probably, if you have the actual document open.
I've got it open, so I'd be happy to kind of bounce back and forth. I don't want to.
So why don't you go into the document right now, and then we can just kind of show you guys how it's laid out. And again, if you have it on your own screen and that's easier, that's fine too. I can refer to pages. So you'll see the table of contents at the beginning, and the introductory piece is really just kind of about how this came to be. So if you go to the next page, Sarah, the introduction, this is a nice piece for your authorizer, whether that's you or the board that you're working with. And Brian, in your case, that would be the Office of Educational Opportunity or UW system. And it's a good piece in the sense that it will provide that entity that's authorizing information about how this came to be and what it means to be an authorizer. So if you kind of go down to the structure and content, that was the, yeah. So you can take a look at this piece, these 3 core best practices, and you'll see this is really the structure of this whole document. So I'm going to let you just read those 3 bullets rather than reading them to you. Right. So just looking at that, when you look at those 3 things, what do you think? I mean, does this make sense to you about what an authorizer would potentially do or focus on? Does it bring up questions for you?
Well, I guess my feedback is that I think it's important that we have high expectations and that we have what I often talk about, just saying that you have follow through and follow up, and that it's not just about having high expectations, but really having a process to make sure that what we intended to achieve is actually the results that we're getting.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and I think a key part there is consistency, because we're talking about a whole wide range of different and innovative approaches to education, that we all need to share some consistent values and practices and expectations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Hey, Sarah, you can go back to the presentation. We went back to slide 6. I think we might be on now. So authorizing, and this is just a summary of what authorizing is, and it goes into much greater depth and detail in the actual best practices document, but really people are still confused about what it means to even be an authorizer. And so just to get kind of all of us utilizing the same language, authorizing is really about approving the application for a charter, and charter really means contract. So charter is really the contract that exists between the authorizer and the school itself. So the authorizer is actually the entity that is involved in both the process of approving the application, negotiating that charter contract, and then overseeing the school in deciding whether or not to close it or renew it at the end of the contract. So there's been some confusion about what an authorizer is, because in general, in the state of Wisconsin, the authorizer, like at Nuestro Mundo, is the Madison School District. And then you start getting into all the things that a school district does. And that may or may not be what an authorizer would typically do if they weren't a school district. So you look at, say, UW-Madison system, they would not be doing the same kind of things that a local school district board, that's the authorizer, would be doing. So the definition is different than the way we've kind of thought about authorizers in the state of Wisconsin in the past. It doesn't mean that either is right or wrong, but the definition is really more specific than I think we have had authorizers defined in our past in the state. So it really is, the authorizer's job is really just to approve the contract, negotiate the contract, and determine whether or not the school stays open. And so they really can be beneficial in other areas. It doesn't mean that they can't do that, but they do have now, because of state law, authorizers are also required to solicit and evaluate charter school applications. So if you are a school district or any authorizer, whether that's a school district or any number of the other entities that are approved under legislation to authorize schools, They are required each year to solicit and evaluate charter school applications, and that's a new piece, and there's a separate training on that. But they are required to do that if they're receiving federal grant funds. And so the two entities that you guys are involved in will actually be required to solicit and evaluate charter school applications because you're receiving grant funds. They are also required to consider the NACSA, National Association of Charter School Authorizers, Principles and Standards, which this document that we're talking about today was based off of. So it's very similar. It's not the same. And it's possible that legislation would change to actually name this document just because it's less confusing, but it didn't exist at the time the legislators put the NACSA standard requirement of considering into language. So you don't have to, the authorizer does not have to actually say, like, we are adopting the NACSA principles and standards. That's not what our law is. Our law is that they simply must be considered as standards and principles. So there'll be sort of a box to check off, like to say, yes, we consider the NACSA principles and standards. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just wondering if you could help define who, like the actual people in an authorizing body are technically the authorizers, because Wally and I started talking about this the other day, and it's come up at a few other authorizers as well. Like, does it come down to, like in a school district authorizer, the superintendent sort of being the one who's, you know, responsible and the one who signs the contract and is sort of the stop point? Or is it the board president or the board as a body? And then in the case of somewhere like UW system, is it like the director of that office, or is it like a larger governing body within that structure?
Yeah, so the simple answer to that difficult question would be that it is the actual person is whomever the entity has said is the person.
Okay.
So if a local school district board has said the superintendent will advise and the board will vote on it, then that's how it'll go. So board policy around charter schools, because most of our schools are still being authorized by local school districts, it would be listed in board policy around charter schools as to who that would be. But it generally would be the school board president signing that contract. Mm-hmm. Unless they designate someone else to do that. And some districts that are larger, like Madison, Appleton, of course, Milwaukee has a whole nother realm of thinking around this. Green Bay, they have a very a much longer board policy around charters and how they're approved as the application process. Okay. But it's still part of board policy, and that's who's signing off on those things. And then, of course, the other entities, which are like some institutes of higher ed, technical colleges, etc. Mm-hmm. They have their own policies as well, like the Office of Educational Opportunity, as to how that's done in the timeline. So we have throughout some of these documents said things, use the phrase authorizer or its designee, because it depends on how the board wants to approach that. And frankly, like in your case, Wally, it's really the authorizer won't know. So it's your job as the superintendent to advise them on what the process would be. And our solicitation of application process lays some of that out as well, which is also under the resources tab that Sarah was talking about on their website there. And that kind of lays out, again, like how you're looking for applications and what the authorizer's job is to do that. So there isn't an easy answer to that, but definitely you have to have a point person, even if that's a board member who's got an interest or background in this information. But mostly in school district authorized charter schools, it's going to be the superintendent.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the big thing for you guys, kind of one of the big things to take back is just that your authorizer does need to consider those NACSA principles and standards. That's still what legislation says. And even though this document is based off of the NACSA principles and standards, you still have to be able to say, we consider the NACSA principles and standards as an authorizer. So that's something that you need to know. And I also need to be very clear, it's not a requirement that you adopt them. It is just a requirement that the authorizer considers them. And that may sound like semantics, but it's a very important language distinction in the law. Okay, so the screen that Sarah has up now, the slide, just very clearly kind of states the 3 areas that authorizers should really focus on, and what they, basically when they're looking at a school and authorizing a school, they want to do these things, and they may seem sort of broad and maybe even a little esoteric, but really these are the things that they're focusing on: upholding best practices, encouraging and endorsing school autonomy, and assuring student and public interest. And then our document goes through what those things mean. But when we talk about the first thing, so upholding best practices for schools, can you go back to the PDF now, Sarah? It's actually page 7 of that document. So underneath the upholding best practices for schools, these are the kinds of things that we want authorizers to focus on. And if you think about the difference between understanding and micromanaging, it's a good thing to think about. So they need to, in their application process, have developed and adopted best practices for approving applicants and maintaining best practices for the schools they oversee, meeting identified educational needs of students, obviously. And then, the other thing, and this is where authorizers sometimes get into difficulty, and that is the overseeing that they're meeting those performance guidelines that have been set up. And in the charter contracts, the determination of what those data points and metrics are is very important. And it's an area that over time has been somewhat controversial for charters, because when you first enter into the contract, let's use the example of your consortium for your virtual school, Wally, that you guys were talking about doing. You don't know who your students are. You don't know which districts they're coming from. You don't really know how they're going to perform on the measures that you have set into place, because you don't even know who the students are yet. So you're setting up in a contract with your authorizer what the performance measures are, and yet without knowing who you're actually serving, it can be really difficult to say what you hope those outcomes will be. And I'm talking specifically about student achievement outcomes here, of course. And, same thing with you, Brian. You guys are kind of moving forward by expanding up grade levels. And while you may know most of your students, you may not know exactly like what measures are we going to use to show success here. And might be a little easier there for you guys because you know the students, but it's still, as you're writing the contract, can be really difficult. So one thing I really recommend in maintaining the autonomy for the school, but accountability with the authorizer, is that you think about those performance measures and metrics really clearly as you're setting it up in the contract. And so while today we're talking about the authorizer, I'm also talking to you guys on the school side to say, you want what should be measured to show success and what you're really looking for to be in that contract. And then it's the authorizer's responsibility to ensure that they're holding accountable the school to meet those measures of success. And, you know, I'm pretty familiar with the Madison School District's chartering process, and what has been true in the past with them is that the measures of success have kind of been set up in the same way across the district for schools. And in general, that's not the practice we want to see for authorizers with charter schools, because charters are different. And so you really want the measures to be measuring what you're trying to accomplish in the school versus what an entire district may be trying to accomplish. Some measures may be the same, but at one city, for example, you guys are serving a very different population than other, say, you know, schools for younger learners around the city. So the types of things you're trying to accomplish should be different. Same with the virtual school approach. You know, you've got kids from different districts. You've got kids that are part-time, full-time. I mean, so what your goals are based on data should be different. And so that's a really important part of this, is that the authorizer oversees the performance guidelines, that they are also working to maintain autonomy for the school.
Mm-hmm. And Wally, you might, especially as a virtual school, reach out to other virtual schools, and I can help you get connected to some of them, because I know that this performance issue has really been a challenge for some of them, to be able to show that their students are making growth, because growth in their school often looks different than, you know, the normal performance measures. So definitely something that we could circle back to.
Right. Without getting deep in the weeds, I mean, we've already started looking at that. We have 4 different populations that we're going to target, with each having specific measurements based on those population groups, as well as looking at it from the perspective that it is virtual, that, like you said, it'd be impossible for us to try to come up with a matrix for 427 or 26 school districts we potentially would receive individuals from. So really looking at it from a perspective of gradual release. So not only is it about based on the population, but it's a lot of direct instruction and matrices that we're going to track performance there. And then how do we gradually release that responsibility to kids? So those are the 2 kind of big buckets that we've looked at to try to address that question.
Awesome. Well, you're far down that road, but it's a good path to be exploring.
Well, and that's really important, because even kind of taking the 50-foot view from above, if your authorizer is the one responsible for ensuring the success of that virtual school, even though the students aren't housed physically in your district boundaries, then what you set up for measures of achievement it's really important, because as the authorizer, they need to be able to say, yes, we think this school is successful. I mean, that's really what that first thing is about, is the best practices for that school. So you're saying, here's what we believe the best practices are in measuring the achievement. And then the authorizer, the board, needs to say yes or no, we believe you're meeting those goals that have been set forth.
So what we're looking at is, like, we're focusing a lot on what our instructional model is going to be. And we're combining, like you say, things that the district just doesn't do or even consider. For example, we're using a curriculum out of Anji, China, where no school in all of the United States is using it. But we're melding it with another program that's been around for 30 years, expeditionary learning. And so I think for us, what we need to do is, like, figure out how these work together, and what does that mean for our community, and what do we want to focus on as significant points of growth and accountability. So you know, we're working with partners on what this accountability is going to look at. And they each have their own measurements of accountability too, that we have to take into account as well, just to, you know, make sure that we're showing fidelity to the programs.
That's exactly right. And so you take that expeditionary learning outcomes that they utilize to measure for success in the on G-Play or on G-Play. I know I've read about it too. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure I'm hacking it apart. But I'm sure they have outcomes too, even though you're the first school in the US to do it. I'm sure they do as well. Right. And so the outcomes from both of those in combination with what you're doing makes that also challenging.
But I had a question for you, Heather. When we talk about autonomy, are we also talking about what it means to be an independent? What does an independent charter need structurally? Yeah. Okay, so we're getting there. Is that later on, or is that a different?
No, it's a great lead in to the next part. So if you look at that section right there where Sarah is, bottom of page 7, if you have the document, this is, so again, we have the 3 core best practices for authorizers, and one is the upholding best practices, which we were just talking about. The second is really endorsing school autonomy, and this is where Wisconsin differs slightly from the NACSA standards, and that is that we really believe in these core autonomies that are listed here, and made the determination with the DPI and WRCCS that these should be very clearly listed in this document, because it definitely has been an issue of both confusion and difficulty at times between the authorizer and the school. And so the idea here is that look at it from both lenses, the authorizer and the school. But as an authorizer, they are supposed to really, as a best practice, allow for the school's autonomy in these 6 areas. Staffing, that's a clear one, but let me give you just a couple of examples. So I'll use Nuestro Mundo as an example. So in the school district, if the authorizer were allowing for complete autonomy around staffing, the school would be able to determine the staffing needs for Nuestro Mundo completely. So no people being transferred in, not part of, you know, saying you have X number of FTE for teachers, X number for social workers, whatever. The school determines the staffing needs based on their relationship with the authorizer and a budgetary model. So it is easier when it's a completely independent authorizer like UW Madison or Office of Educational Opportunity, because there aren't a bunch of other teachers that are needing to be placed, you know, in the school. But staffing is often one of the hardest things that school district authorizers have to deal with, because charter schools can often be smaller than the other schools in the district, and they have, you know, a 0.6 counselor at the high school, and they need a 0.2 at the charter. And so there are all these issues around that. But the authorizer should not be the one making the decision about who the staff are in those buildings, nor the exact FTE of the staff in those buildings. That should be left up to the school itself. And that's challenging. It's honestly the one area that can be the hardest for school district authorizers to swallow, because it's just difficult. Even if they believe in it, it can be very difficult from an FTE perspective, especially if you're taking an existing school and making it a charter, you know. And that has happened a lot in our state, and it often is the downfall or demise of the school, is placing someone in a charter school who knows nothing about the educational model, nor even really wants to be there. And I'm sure we've all experienced some things like that. So autonomy over staffing is an important thing that the authorizers need to understand must be in place. Do you guys have questions about that or specific things that?
Yeah, I have a question since you're bringing Nuestro Mundo up quite a bit.
I'm just using it as an example since you.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering.
On you.
This is a selfish question. I'm just wondering, with the changes in state laws around chartering, is there going to be a requirement for for instrumentality charters to move away towards more autonomy or lose their charter?
So go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I was gonna say I can chime in. I've been asking Nico about that a lot lately, so I'll try to summarize his responses without getting into it too much. The thing that they can most control at DPI and that they're most interested in controlling is the new grantees. And so any new school that's made with this round of federal money does need to have all the autonomies in place that are sort of the new standard in Wisconsin. As far as the old ones, the existing charters, really the only thing that they can do is ask that when they renew their contracts that they comply with the new contract benchmarks, which do include a little bit more of these autonomy pieces, but not to the level I think that the new charters are going to be expected to sort of abide by. Okay. So at those points of renewal, there'll be a little bit of a nudge, but it's not to the same level.
Okay.
Heather, is that similar to what you were thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that word consider is so important, that they consider these NACSA standards. They're not required to put them into place. And of course, for those of us who care deeply about the autonomy of schools and the creation of best practices for those schools, we would like to see it be required. In part, I'll speak for myself. I would like to see it required in particular because of the ability for schools to truly implement the innovative curriculum and ideas that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, it's interesting. DPI has a strange, I think, relationship with authorizers in that there isn't really this level of accountability that you might have expected or that you would see in other states. The authorizers are sort of responsible in their own kind of bubble, and they're advised to consider these principles. We'll provide them resources, but there isn't that kind of oversight other than just through that simple contract that does get sent to DPI. So it's looser than you might think or you might imagine.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's
Well,
no
from
implementation police,
because they're still impacting the authorizer through funding. And if you don't have certain assurances, they can withhold funding. So I think that's the way that they've addressed that in the past.
Yeah, for the new ones though, but for existing existing charters, the relationship they have with those authorizers is virtually non-existent at this point.
So one of the things that we're doing as an authorizer is we're looking at, when you look at those 6 components, is that as an authorizer, we're going to set parameters for fiscal stability, and that's part of the contract. So for example, we're going to be talking about what would be an appropriate fund balance that a charter school should carry in order to remain viable from year to year. And then from there, it's going to be that as an authorizer, because we are going to use CISA 10 as the fiscal agent, we're not part of the staffing. We're not part of the budget. We are going to be simply the conduit of revenue, into the fiscal agent, and then the fiscal agent has all the staffing and budgeting controls.
Yeah, and that's completely appropriate for any authorizer. That's actually exactly what the budget side of what an authorizer should be doing that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. It just gets confusing when the authorizer is the school district, because then, you know, you fall under the sort of same budget timeline and guidelines as the district. But what you're saying is really what the authorizer should be doing. And that's really just determining the financial needs of what the authorizer needs to be doing to help make the school successful. And then leaving the budget side of whatever it is per pupil that's being spent on the kids in that charter school, leaving that budget side to the school itself, whether that's the governing council of the school or, you know, how those decisions are being made. But it's not the job of the authorizer to determine the exact budget for the school. It's their job to actually oversee what the financial needs are. And then the budget itself and how it breaks down is the school's job, not the authorizer. So it's a little bit, you know, a little bit of a blurred line, I think, in some cases, in particular in a virtual school setting, I think even more so.
Right. And I think that if you look at, quite honestly, with the way we set it up, we're kind of, even though we're still an instrumentality of the Gilman School District, it really is a hybrid because of being a consortium and using the fiscal agent. You know,
Yeah.
now it kind of just.
Oh, that's interesting, Wally. In my head, I was thinking you were a non-instrumentality because of how you were bringing in CISA 10. So you're an instrumentality, but just like partnering or, you know, hiring them or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I could hire anybody to be my fiscal agent.
Yeah, right. It's not common though. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So, I mean, the other thing there is just that the authorizers should really make sure, however the funding is set up, that there aren't conflicts of interest and incentives or disincentives for that would compromise their own judgment in the success of the school. So I think, you know, in your case, Wally, that just needs to be kind of watched, you know, and paid attention to. And I wouldn't foresee anything major happening there, except if there were a large number of students being pulled from other places and those districts don't want their kids open and rolling out. You know, the financial incentive can create difficulty at times. And Brian, in your situation, I don't think that would be an issue actually at all, because the kids being served there will primarily be from the Madison School District attendance area, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't imagine there maybe some Prairie because of where you guys are located. I'm not sure. But
Well, the other side of autonomy, and I don't, you know, and I know we're going to get at this in future workshops, is that a lot of the financial responsibility falls on us. You know,
yeah,
we have our decision making, you know, but we spend a lot of time building partnerships, fundraising.
yeah,
You know, it's a whole nother level of energy
yeah,
that needs to be invested versus, you know, like a traditional school where, you know, you just run the school, you know, but it's both. It's kind of like a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it takes a lot of your energy, but on the other hand, that's really what makes you a strong charter school, because you're an invested part in the community. Like, we're creating a community, we're becoming community leaders in our neighborhood, you know, and it's exciting, but it's takes a lot of energy, you know.
absolutely. I mean, you that amount of money that'll come through the OEO to you guys is, well, it actually comes directly to you, not through them, but for the per pupil amount. But it's not enough to just run the school. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially our community is, you know, we're a subsidized community and we do run a preschool, you know, so
Yeah.
that's the whole money piece is the budgeting and finance piece could be a make or break deal right there.
I have a lot of confidence in
Yeah.
what you guys are doing. I think you're going to be okay, but I know I'm sure it's scary.
So much of this balance of, you know, who's overseeing all these tasks has to do with relationships, especially, you know, like in smaller school districts. Well, I think really anywhere. I mean, being able to trust handing off some of these pieces that were traditionally, like Heather said, you know, done by the school district board. And now there's new obligations and new people are fulfilling those obligations, and it really shifts those balances, and you need to have trust and you need to have strong relationships with, you know, the people you're working with.
Right. And the good thing for you guys, Brian, I think it's a good thing, is that the OEO is new at this. And so they want it to be successful, and they'll be, I think that's a good thing, honestly.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not the only one that they're authorizing. So there's, you know,
Right.
2 others so that are under grants as well. And they have a lot of these same questions. So, okay, so then curriculum and assessment is fairly straightforward. Obviously, the authorizer should not be telling you what your curriculum should be, nor what your assessment should be. You would have the assessment piece and the data in the contract, like we talked about earlier with the first point about upholding best practices. The governance structure is also a piece that should be autonomous for the school itself. So how the school is governed. So who's on that governing board, how the decisions are made throughout the governing board. And that's a whole nother training. So when you get to the point of where you are determining what your governing board will be or what they'll look like, and like one city already has a board, will they be the governing board for the school, or will you have something different? It's my understanding it will be the same, but that I don't know where you guys are headed with that. But there's definitely a whole nother structure that we would talk to you about. The governance, how the school is governed, is not about the authorizer at all. That's totally separate. So when we talk about governing board, that's not the Board of Education. It's a whole separate entity. And they are actually the ones who's ever let's just call them the governing board or governing council president. They're the ones that sign the contract between the authorizer and the school. So that's a requirement for all charter schools, that they do have a governing board. So, and if you have questions about that and you're thinking about it, I think Sarah and I can answer those things. And if we can't, we can find the answer for you.
Yeah, and once you have those people kind of on board, or as you have people who you think will be on board in the governance, we have really great summer trainings coming up in August on the governance board, and so you could kind of tap into those and maybe send a few people there.
Yeah, and many districts over the years, and I know Sarah's kind of setting this up through Works now, they also want individual help with their governing board. So there can be the oversight training, and then every board is so different that you may want to consider even just setting up an individual like training for the board, the governing board. I really suggest it strongly, because your governing board is the entity that is like, I call it like the keeper of the culture, you know, the mission keepers of your school. And they should not just be in name only, and they shouldn't just be fundraisers. And so there's some new, I don't know what the right word is, Sarah, but there's some new language around who can and cannot be on the governing council. It used to be that you could have no more than 49% staff of the building could be on the council. Now there's 0. So nobody employed by the district can be on the governing board.
As a voting member.
As a voting member. So,
and that's from when you start accepting grant funds, which you guys both are now. So if you've had staff members sort of serving as your pre-planning committee, like that's fine. If they want to stay on as non-voting members, advisor type people, that's fine. But they can't be your voting members written into your bylaws.
Yeah, what I always say to people in talking with the DPI about this, and Sarah, you know, this would be what we would say to people at the ISN, from the ISN. People say, well, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, there's no police, like, it doesn't matter. And we say this: do not ever do something that will set yourself up for having a contract essentially be nullified.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing if you put in a contract that that has people on it, on your governing board, that cannot be on it based on the way the legislation is now.
Yeah.
So don't do it. That's my advice. You're right. There's no police, but you just never know when there's someone who gets upset and starts.
There is a local paper, though. There's no police, but there is a local paper. You don't want to be in it. Not for that. Yeah, but I mean, the biggest thing I think at this point for both of you in kind of these early stages are defining those roles and responsibilities. And those initial governance board trainings will help you do that. But then the real way to dig into that is to have a person like Heather or somebody from Board on Track, which is our other governance partner right now, actually just like Zoom into your meeting with you or come to your meeting with you and say, okay, your job is this and your job is this, and just really start to like hash that out so that people know where they, you know, should be playing.
Yeah, and it also, and Sarah's saying that, I mean, it's completely not self-serving at all when we say this, that having been both a central office administrator and principal involved in starting charters, I would say one of the things I would say to you is it's really nice having an outside person tell your governing people or your authorizer what needs to happen versus you being the one to do it, because it does sound a little bit self-serving, like, you know, like, oh, staff my back about curriculum. You know, so I think it's really good to have outside people come in and do that. You know, it's just an area that we feel pretty strongly about, and Works has many people who can, they can set you up with to do that. So that's governance. Schedule is sort of an obvious thing, but it goes back to the staffing discussion we were having earlier, that, you know, in both of your cases, I think it's not going to be an issue. In particular, the virtual one won't be an issue, except for maybe the part-time students that are maybe in the school and, you know, accessing the virtual school. You'll have to figure that out. But schedule is on there as an autonomous need for charters, because sometimes the authorizer will step in and say, no, you can't start at this time of day. No, you can't go later on Tuesdays because of the thing that you want to do because of our busing problem or
year-round school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So authorizers are to allow for autonomy around schedule, and that can be an issue, and again can make or break the model for the school if it's not allowed, if autonomy is not allowed. And if you have questions about that, we're happy to go into that with you as well. And then facilities is the other piece, and that's a piece we've added that isn't really part of the NACSA standards, and that is because of our experience seeing situations where the school is what I call a parallel school, so a school in existence that then has a charter school within it, and the facility, the charter doesn't have autonomy around the use of that facility, and potentially it even gets in the way of the educational model that people are trying to implement. We've seen that a lot, and again, it can be the downfall of schools. So facility autonomy over facility is also very important.